So just a quick announcement, the restrooms, if you haven't figured out yet, this is the ladies' restroom and this is the men's restroom, so there are bathrooms in this building. As Riyadh mentioned, there are people in this room who have experienced the Nakba. The Nakba was not this symbolic event that happened, it was an actual event that people went through. The forced displacement and the pain and suffering is all still very present today and in the past. We have two people with us today who have experienced that firsthand. They remember what it felt like, and they want to share a few minutes of their time to let you know about their story. First, we have Henry Marta. He is going to let us know a little bit about his experience. Mr. Marta.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Henry Marta. I was born in Jerusalem in 1937. I was born in the Old City, about a quarter of a mile from the Holy Sepulchre, no more than maybe 3/4 of a mile from the Dome of the Rock, inside the walls of the city of Jerusalem. When I was about 1 year old, my family built a house in a suburb of Jerusalem, and my older brother and I and my parents moved to that house in a suburb that's called Katamon in Jerusalem. And so we lived there between 1938 and about 1947, the latter end of 1947. During that period, of course, I have a brother that was born 1941 and a sister born 1945. The violence in Palestine, the way I remember it, I recall the first and the second period of violence. The first period of violence happened mostly between 1942 to 1945. And that's when the Jewish forces and terrorists started terrorizing the British government because they were angling to try to give them more privileges in many of the different areas and sections of Palestine. And I remember when I was 6 years old, the main road that took me from my house to the primary school I went to, which was very close to the Notre Dame building outside the old city of Jerusalem. The terrorists came and destroyed a big building that's called the King David Hotel. Many of you, if you read any stories, will remember that. Well, my uncle almost was killed in that destruction. He was lucky he had one of his brother's friends from Chile that came over and met him this morning before he went to the meeting in that building. He used to be an accountant for the British government, and he demanded that he goes and buy him coffee at the YMCA across the street from the King David building. And while they were sitting having coffee, the King David building blew up, and he saw many of the bodies that were thrown out of that building. As a matter of fact, I remember very much, I was only a few years old, and he told me that human guts were hanging all over the power lines. That was my first memory of the violence, how it started. But shortly thereafter, a lot of violence started taking place in the neighborhoods of New Jerusalem. For example, I remember sleeping in bed one night when a terrorist group came and destroyed a hotel called the Semiramis Hotel. And this was so close to our house, and it happened at about 2 o'clock in the morning, And all of a sudden, I saw myself rise in the air and end up in the middle of the room, you know, on my face. And that was quite harrowing experience. But in the meantime, as time went on, these atrocities continued on in our neighborhood and many neighborhoods of Jerusalem and the rest of Palestine. In our area, there are at least about 4 or 5 buildings in the few blocks in our neighborhood that were destroyed by Jewish terrorists. And the main intention was to get the people to leave. I remember one day my mother was in the front yard looking after some of her flowers. She loved to grow flowers. And she was lucky, she was at one end of the front yard, and a bomb came and exploded right very close to her, and she was hurt with minor injuries, but she was saved. I mean, she didn't, you know, she could have died in that experience. The violence increased and increased, and one day that my parents said, well, we can't keep the kids here anymore, we gotta go some other place. So we left our house, and it's interesting, we had a beautiful house, a duplex house with 3 bedrooms in each side with all the amenities of life that were so great. We had to move to the old city of Jerusalem to a one room that we were given by the monastery in the old city of Jerusalem. And while we were living there, we continued to hear about all the violence that used to take place. And my father, once in a while, because my parents did not take anything from our house, because they thought, well, we were going to go back after a few weeks, he would go to our house in Katamon and try to bring anything that my mother wanted. Well, on more than one occasion, we used to have sniper fire from Jewish terrorists that lived in what's called the Talbiya, another suburb of Jerusalem, right next to ours. And one time, a couple of bullets ricocheted from a power pole and did not hit my father, but he was only about 1 foot away from that pole. So it was very obvious that he couldn't go to the house anymore. So we moved out of the house and we stayed permanently. We couldn't go to the house anymore. What's interesting is after we went to the old city of Jerusalem, as the period has gone by, and now 1947 and 48, that's where quite a bit of the violence took place and increased and accelerated. And about the early May in 1948, we went to visit my uncle's family who had run away to Beit Jala. We went to visit them, and we were coming back on May 15th, exactly. One day after Israel announced that they were going as an independent state. On the way, we hired a taxi. My mother hired a taxi. My father was in Jerusalem. And we started out of Beit Jala, and there's a main street between Bethlehem and Beit Jala, heading towards Jerusalem. We went about no more than about 1.5 miles when the British Army was leaving Palestine. And a big part of the British Army leaving Palestine were heading south from Jerusalem to the south onto Egypt. And I still remember that just like now, when the officer that was leading the army and all the tanks that were leaving and trucks, and he stopped the car and told them to turn around and go back. Can't go. So we had to go back. And I remember very well my mother was alone with us, so we rented an orchard in the outside Beit Jala, and we stayed there until we were able to contact my father. And we stayed there for about 3 months before we were able to reach him, because nobody could go anymore to Jerusalem. That area was occupied by Israel, and there was war going on. I consider my family really very lucky, although we went through some harrowing experience, because none of us died as a result of that experience. And the acceleration of violence in the period of 47-48 until Israel declared independence, of course, the violence continued quite a bit, and the Jewish forces took over many cities well before any of the Arabic armies came into Jordan. And I could just mention to you many of the main cities that were conquered and taken over well before any Arabic armies were sent in. Cities like Haifa and Safad and Tiberias and Ramleh and Yafa and the suburbs of Jerusalem. Most of those were taken pretty early in the game. After the armistice took place in 1949, we were able to get out of the old city of Jerusalem, and since there were at least 2 of us going to high school, we moved to Ramallah and finished high school in Ramallah, and then I came to the United States in 1953. I'm hoping that Nahid is going to be able to tell you a little more about the following occurrence of displacement of people. I was there only during the 47, 48, and 49 to 53 period. The displacement of people took place again, of course, as you know, in 1967. And, of course, the villages that have been destroyed by Israel are countless. You've already heard about that. And as a matter of fact, many villages were destroyed before 1948, and many of them were destroyed right after that period in order to erase the existence of Arabs in that country. And I would like to thank you very much for the time you've given me to give you my experience, as short as it is. Thank you.